To let you know, we are free and on demand for those who may not listen regularly. We're on iTunes and alchemyradio.net, and you can follow us and join the Alchemy community on Facebook and Twitter, so say hello. We'd love to hear from you. We exist, of course, thanks to your kind donations, so thank you to everybody who does so via the website. We're completely non-profit and intend to stay that way. So then, on to the show. Alchemy. This week's guest is Lenon Honor. Lenon is a writer, musician, video producer, talk show host and counsellor. His website, lenonhonor.com, has provided a wealth of information and inspiration in regards to manhood, fatherhood, marriage, children, family and personal growth. Lenon is the writer of 2 published books. His first, Writings for the Fathers of the World of Tomorrow, was written to inspire current and future parents and to encourage healthy relationships between fathers and sons. The second book, Deep in the Garden of Consciousness, delves deep into metaphysics, spirituality and consciousness. Lenon has produced 8 major documentaries to date. Film topics range from spirituality, religion, media mind control, subliminal manipulation, transhumanism, the occult, politics, the entertainment industry, amongst other salient topics. Currently, Lenon is working on several projects, including his video series, The Truth About Subliminal Messages, How to Protect Your Subconscious Mind. Lenon, you're very welcome to Alchemy. How are things?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful, John. Good to be with you, and thank you for allowing me to come on to your show. I really do appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I really appreciate your time as well. I've been looking to speak to you for quite some time, and I'm very pleased that I have the opportunity to do so, because you've a different perspective on what's going on in the world to quite a lot of people. You are very much based in family values and quite a lot of traditional values. A lot of people neglect the daily nitty-gritty of everyday life when they're talking about what's going on in the world around us, particularly that which exists outside of the mainstream. And I find it very refreshing to hear somebody such as you speak on a level that I think so many people can relate to, even if they're new to a lot of the information. And that's something that has attracted me to your work in the past, and I think will appeal to a lot of people as we have our conversation today. So I'm going to ask you the question that I ask absolutely everybody who comes on this show, and that's, how did you get from where you were, Lenon, to where you are now? You can be as in-depth or as brief as you like.
Well, you know, life, it began for me when I was conceived. Yes. There's been a steady process. It's just everyday progress and personal refinement, and then searching out information and knowledge. I think that there comes a point in our life at some point where we really start to ask questions about the nature of reality, and then we start to question a lot of our own beliefs. You know, I remember a time where I used to follow the mainstream media, and I used to, everything that was said, I believed it to be true. Everything that was proposed, I accepted it without any evidence or proof. And then there came a point in my life where I really started to question not only mainstream media, but then also just what I believed to be true and what I valued in my own life. And, you know, there's always like an aha moment. And when it comes to my own moment of really thinking about the world in a different type of way, I think September 11, 2001 was kind of like a turning point for me. Initially, I didn't ask any critical questions, and I accepted the official version of September 11, 2001 as being true, although I had a lot of questions. But then there was a part of me that recognized that something wasn't quite right. But it wasn't until my first son was born, he's 11 years old now, where I really started to question reality. And this set me on course to studying people like Jordan Maxwell, David Icke, what's this brother's name? Freeman Fly.
Oh, yeah.
And getting just getting into the alternate information. There's another individual, because this is going back over a decade ago. I can't think of his name right now, but he was very influential in my progressions too. But really, it was more about me asking critical questions about the nature of reality. And then I started to research more. I researched, I studied, I started getting into alternative news. I went down that paradigm for many years. And then I started producing my own documentaries on similar topics that I was researching. And then later on, I started to transition into looking more at the internal situation that's taking place within the human condition, as opposed to the external forces, the Illuminati, global bankers, so forth and so on. As instead of externalizing seeking power and seeking to try to get information and research on those particular topics. I got to a point of mastery on those topics, did documentaries on those topics, but then I started to look within and ask critical questions about myself, about the nature of my own humanity. And what I found was that throughout this process, what I was really seeking for was self-empowerment. And then when I started to, really step into my role as a man and as a husband, as a father, that empowerment really played a very positive role in terms of what I'm doing now with my family, what I'm doing now with my wife. We've been together for 14 years. So this has been the progressions, and it continues. 10 years from now, I hope to be in a much more empowered place, but it all starts somewhere, and we all have to start somewhere. And it starts with asking those critical questions and being willing and courageous enough to question what we believe to be true.
You mentioned the media early on in your description there. Let's talk about that for a second, because there's a lot of subliminal media programming that goes on. Like you, I was somebody who lapped up as much of mainstream media as I possibly could. I thought it was very important to know what was going on in the world, and my only outlet for that was the news on TV or radio or whatever it was. And I kind of went through a de-learning process or an awakening process then with regard to that. So what can you tell us about subliminal media programming and what goes on within the mainstream? Because I think that's quite a good frame of reference for us as we delve further into the topics then at hand.
Yes, and that's one of my areas of expertise, dealing with subliminal messages and media manipulation. I have documentary media manipulation, or a documentary series, video series, Transcending Media Manipulation. I also had a radio show for a couple of years, Transcending Media Manipulation. Mainstream media is about mind control. Nothing more, nothing less. And I think that's one of the topics, mind control, that really kind of got me moving in a particular direction when I really began to research. Matter of fact, the person I was thinking about earlier just came to mind, Michael Tsarion. I remember he had a video series out where he was talking about the subversive use of symbolism in corporate logos.
Yeah.
That had a very profound impact on me because he was talking about subliminal messages, subliminal symbolism, but then also subliminal messages. And over the last decade, that has been a main focus of my research to a great degree, especially when we talk about media manipulation. The mainstream news ultimately is designed to incorporate people's minds into a belief system, and as many people as possible, to where people begin to think the same way. And ultimately, the thinking is not so much critical thinking, but thinking to such a degree to where a person externalizes their power onto the mainstream news and accepts whatever the mainstream news says as being absolute truth, without any conclusive evidence or proof to back up any given claim, without any research, without any study, without question. And ultimately, that's pretty much what the mainstream news functions as. And one of the there's a couple of tools that mainstream media uses in terms of manipulation, and one happens to be subliminal messages. For those who are all, just a quick overview, subliminal simply means below the normal threshold of auditory or visual perception within the human being. So there's like this baseline level of where we can hear things where we can hear things and then consciously register them. But then there's also below that baseline, below that threshold, which is called liminal. That's called the like submarine. That means below the marine layer. Subconscious, that means below the conscious mind. So subliminal means below that line of demarcation between your conscious awareness and your subconscious awareness. A lot of the programming that we receive is basically subconscious. It doesn't register audio in terms of audio, how we hear it in many cases. Also, in terms of perception, liminal being where we perceive things consciously, sometimes the information is being presented to us subliminally below the line of demarcation wherein we can accept it on a conscious level. It's below that threshold. So now we're dealing within the subconscious. A lot of the programming deals with the subconscious mind. Interestingly enough, the subconscious mind functions differently than the conscious mind. The conscious mind is the critical part of our psychology, if you will, as human beings. It asks the question, who, what, where, why, when, how. It asks the question, where's the evidence and proof? It asks the question, is that true? It's always seeking to solve problems and to define undefined elements. That's pretty much how your conscious is the critical aspect, the critical thinking. And a lot of us, that is what we need. I mean, we really need to be able to critically think. So when we do get information from the mainstream news, we ask critical questions. That's taking a conscious approach. That's when people say, I'm conscious, okay? But on a deeper level, the subconscious mind doesn't ask those questions. The main function of the subconscious mind is to protect the conscious mind from any level of subconscious or any level of conscious trauma. So anytime you can't define an undefined element, anytime you cannot solve a problem, anytime you're unable to get the answer to who, what, where, why, when, how, or et cetera, you're psychologically speaking, your conscious mind begins to experience psychological trauma. So what happens is the subconscious mind, as a psychological defense mechanism, it kicks in and takes whatever the issue is that you're unable to resolve and then submerges it within the subconscious mind. So whatever that issue is can be embedded into the subconscious mind. And sometimes what's being given to you is nothing more than programming that is being embedded into your subconscious mind. So you can socially engineer groups of people by giving them information that's not registering or that they can't process consciously, and it's nothing more than programming now that's being accepted and submerged within the subconscious mind. And so to a great degree, just to surmise, the mainstream media is designed to tap into the subconscious mind of the global population and ultimately issue programming. That programming is not in the best interest, for the most part, is not in the best interest of the global population. And that's what we call mind control, because ultimately what happens is all of the subconscious programming that we received, whether that's through subliminal messages, subliminal association, whether that's through media saturation. I'll talk about all these different concepts inside of my book, also in past radio shows. Whatever technique is being used, neuro-linguistic programming, it's all designed to program the subconscious mind. And what happens is all of that programming ultimately enacts a level of behavior modification, wherein people begin to do things, they begin to behave in particular ways that is not necessarily conscious. And so what better way to mind control people than to tap into the subconscious mind and then modify behavior and then have people behave how you would want them to behave without their conscious awareness of it. And that's pretty much how, in a nutshell,
it's like a beautiful system if it wasn't used for such nefarious purposes, because it has the double whammy effect of those who are being affected, which is pretty much all of us at some point, not knowing that we're being affected and then denying that we are if it's pointed out, because how could somebody else know us better than we know ourselves and know the processes of our own mind better than we know them ourselves? And I know that any time I may have in my slightly earlier days when I pointed this type of thing out to people, you've been met with a brick wall of abuse in some cases. Now, I was not the right messenger for that message quite a lot of the time. I'm far too blunt in my approach. But it's not an easy thing to hear. It's a paradigm-shattering notion, and most of us don't like that kind of blunt force or, that brute force when we meet it and when it does challenge our own belief system. So it's not an easy thing and not an easy process, certainly in my experience anyway, to come out of that. And I'm getting that impression also from you, Lenon. But to further kind of examine the media and the mainstream media as it is, this works on kids as well. And I've just noticed over the last kind of 5 or 6 years how it seems to have been ramped up. The subconscious and subliminal messages seem to be directed more and more towards kids. It's like, get them early. We've got the adults, get them early now. Would you agree with that, or would you dispute it?
Oh, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Matter of fact, this is one of the aspects of mind control. Children, and I have 5 children, the oldest is 11. When we, and all of us, when we come into the world, we're operating based upon the subconscious mind. We don't have a level of conscious awareness. That's why a lot of us, we have difficulty remembering childhood. Like if you said, oh, do you remember when you were 1 year old? No, your brain, you're still development. Or, no, I don't. Or do you remember when you were a month old? No, 2 months old. That's because things are not being processed consciously, so you don't have a conscious recollection of particular experiences. Part of the reason why is because as children, we operate mainly based upon our subconscious mind. That's why children pick up languages very quickly. Okay, and all of that, in order to analyze on some level at least, it's really not analyzing. In other words, in order to incorporate a new language so quickly as a child has to be, all of that language has to be programmed into the subconscious mind. Because when we speak, when we talk about language, when we're speaking, we're not necessarily thinking, okay, I'm going to be speaking in English. Okay, you're not thinking that. Yeah. It's part of subconscious programming to speak that way, to use that language. And that's all programmed into us. But that's because as children, we operate mainly based upon our subconscious mind. Now, what happens is as we grow older, we begin to come into a level of conscious awareness. The idea is to transform the baby who is operating based upon the subconscious mind. And this is my wife and our goal. Transform that baby into a conscious being. In other words, now it's coming out of the subconscious, operating simply based upon the subconscious mind. Now it comes into a level of conscious awareness. Now it can ask critical questions like who, what, where, why, when, how. Where's the evidence and proof?
Yeah.
Is that true? Is that false? So you want to raise the child up so that it becomes a conscious being. And see, and this should happen. Parents should do this for their children. The problem is that for a lot of us, that process of coming out of operating based upon our subconscious mind mainly to coming into a level of conscious awareness, it's been stagnated. And one of the reasons why is because a lot of the programming that we receive when we are children is being submerged with the subconscious mind without any conscious defense. In other words, just to make this clearer, the reason why the programming, the mind control, the subliminal messages impact children so well is because children operate based upon their subconscious mind. Subliminal implies sub, below the normal auditory or visual or mental perception of your conscious awareness of the human being. So subliminal, subconscious, below your conscious mind. All subliminal messages are designed to impact the subconscious mind. Subliminals don't impact you consciously. So as a child, if you're operating mainly based upon your subconscious mind, well then yes, the subliminal messages, the mind control programming is going to be more impactful on you as a child. And that's precisely why a lot of the programming in the media, and it's gotten even worse these days, is directed towards children. It's subliminal programming for children who operate based upon their subconscious mind. So it fits perfectly. Now, as parents, our goal should be to in the first place, limit the amount of negative programming that our children receive, because they're going to get it, but you have to make sure you try to limit as much as possible, but then raise them up to where they become conscious beings so that at a certain point when they do receive the subliminal messages of the mind control programming, they'll ask critical questions consciously like who, what, where, why, when, how. Is this really relevant to me? Is this programming? And in this way, they will begin to protect their subconscious mind, consciously protect their subconscious mind from all the degrees of mind control, media manipulation, and subliminal messages.
The language you're using is very interesting there, because we're talking about sub and raise, and you're talking about raising kids and raising consciousness, and it is kind of the same thing. I've heard people such as Mark Passio speak about this, how while a lot of parents might assist their kids in growing older, they don't necessarily raise them, because the idea, as you've just said, is to raise the consciousness of those kids so that they're not operating on a sub-level anymore. It's to get above that and raise the consciousness. The word raise is most certainly used for a reason when it comes to kids being developed and our parents assisting with the development of the kids. And it's something that's forgotten, I think, quite a lot by most people. The job of raising a kid is not necessarily just to make sure they get off to school and that they have enough food on the table. There's a lot more to it, and you've hit the nail on the head there. And I would like, if you would, for you to expand on it a little bit more with regard then to raising kids and raising their consciousness and how difficult that can be in the world that we're in at the moment.
Yeah, and it can be a challenge, but it's also necessary. Mark Passio is a good friend of mine, and I love his work. I appreciate his work to an extreme degree.
Yeah, I think he's phenomenal.
I've known him for many years, and he's right. And this idea of sometimes we use that term so loosely, like raising children. People they just I'm raising these children. But what does that really mean? And this is like the deeper level when we talk about what my wife and I we call conscious parenting. To be a conscious parent, it means that you're trying to mold this child or this infant into a conscious being who is a critical thinker, who is able to solve problems, who is sentient of self. You're also seeking to raise them into balanced emotional beings to where they're not quick to anger or quick to rage like little children tend to be quick to emotional outbursts. It's one thing to be emotional, but it's another thing to have negative emotions master you. Well, this is part of the raising. The children who throw tantrums, oftentimes because parents aren't there to raise them properly. That tantrum stuff, that's all subconscious. People aren't thinking consciously when they're throwing those tantrums. A parent's job is to mold that child and raise that child out of that subconscious programming, which is basically animalistic programming, and let's just be clear about it, raise them out of that and bring them into a level of intellectualism, into a level of critical thinking, into a level to wherein they begin to ask critical questions about the nature of reality, and they question everything. So this can be a challenge, especially for parents these days, because there is so much programming, not only in television, movies, Music these days, I mean, it's not even just these days, but for a long time, the music is an extreme form of programming, negative programming that impacts children's subconscious mind. Television shows, movies, the news, of course, major programming there. I can go on and on and on. The public education system in and of itself, programming. So as parents, my wife and our strategy is to limit the amount of negative programming as much as possible. And we take this to a different level. We talk about raising our children. For instance, we homeschool our children. We home birth our children. We don't externalize our power. We don't have other people watching our children. We don't have our children hanging around other children who we know are not behaving properly. So we have to be very careful and then we don't have a television in the home. Our 3 youngest children, they don't even know what a television is. We haven't had a television in the home for over a decade now. But this doesn't mean that our children aren't experiencing certain types of media. This means that as parents, what we do is we screen things in advance. This can be a challenge. I mean, it's a lot of work that goes in. My wife and I, we screen things in advance. Movies, if we want to let them watch, the DVDs that we get from the library, we screen them in advance. In some cases, the books that we allow them to read, we screen them in advance. This is a proactive approach to parenting. But the idea is this. We've taken a conscious approach, conscious parenting, to protecting our children's subconscious minds. See, and when you do that from the beginning and then you raise them up, again, there's that word, you're raising them up into intellectual beings so that they reach beyond the paradigm of living as animals. And there's nothing wrong with that. People want to live like animals, that's fine too. But the idea is that human beings, in terms of our intellectual capacity, we can reach beyond our animalistic nature and come into a level of spiritual understanding, coming into a level of conscious awareness. By protecting our children's subconscious mind, what we're doing is we're preparing them for that transition. And then the other thing that we're making sure that we're doing is we're making sure that we are engaging them intellectually every single day. Let me just, as a side note, just as an example, what I mean by the animalistic nature. My wife and I, we do not hit or spank or slap or beat our children. Now, I grew up in a household where we got all of that. We got extreme levels of abuse in many cases. I grew up in a very abusive household, but I didn't want to pass that on as a legacy to my children. The point that I'm making is that when we hit, when we slap, when we spank, when we beat our children, we're appealing to the animalistic nature in them, but also the animalistic nature in us.
Yeah.
So what this does is it's programming the children. And see, all of that is subconscious programming. When you hit and you spank and you stimulate these negative emotions in the child, fear, and then you're in a state of rage. Okay, this is all negative emotions, subconscious programming. And what happens is over time, the physical abuse that the child experienced, the child begins to cope with that physically, to where in a slap that you used when the child was 2 doesn't hurt the same way when the child is 3 or when the child is 4. So oftentimes what happens is parents, they ramp it up a little bit more. They slap a little harder. They spank a little harder. They beat the child a little bit harder. But all that's doing is training the child to react emotionally, negative emotions, fear, flight or fight. Now we're getting into subconscious programming. It's subconscious mind, flight or fight, that's subconscious mind. So now the child is being trained through physical abuse, physical violence, and physical pain to operate within their subconscious mind exclusively, which is the antithesis of consciousness. And so oftentimes what people are doing when they're spanking, when they're abusing their children, when they're harming their children, inflicting physical pain, they're treating their children like animals, and then their children begin to operate like animals. They're not thinking intellectually. The child is not thinking intellectually. They're not being trained to think intellectually. They're simply reacting emotionally based upon subconscious programming, flight or fight. The problem with this is that it ultimately degrades the child's progressions towards proper intellectual process. It degrades the child's progressions into becoming conscious beings, because we're basically training them to be subconscious beings operating like lowly animals. So this is another example. It's not just screening the negative content out there, the media that's out there, the books, the television shows, the music. It's not just that. That's part of it. It's also about how we are treating our children, how we are loving them. Okay, because that all plays a role in terms of their intellectual development and in terms of their progressions from being subconscious beings coming to a level and being raised up into conscious beings.
Now, I can hear some parents out there and they're kind of screaming at the radios, and they're saying, well, Lenon, it's very well for you to say that, but I can't deal with it. I have to go to work and I have to get childminders, and I can't control whether they put them in front of the television. Plus, what harm are a few cartoons going to do every day? And as long as they're reading, sure, isn't it good that they're reading something as opposed to reading nothing? What would you say to that kind of a mindset or an attitude?
Well, the thing is that no matter what the situation is, it does not absolve the parent of their responsibility. So in other words, for instance, if we had our children in the public education system, we would make sure that when they got home, that we would engage them intellectually, and we would ask them questions about their day. So we'll ask, how was your day today? Did you have any problems at school? Did anyone say anything inappropriate to you? Did anyone touch you inappropriately? Was there anything that was said that was inappropriate, or that made you feel uncomfortable? So in other words, you're still interacting with them intellectually. See, what I'm saying is that oftentimes what parents do is they absolve themselves of full responsibility of their children. And so then, and even if the child is being taken care of let's say by a child care provider, maybe a relative, it may be the school system, maybe the child's in a public education system. And when the child comes home, the parent doesn't interact with the child. The parent doesn't sit down and talk with the child. The parent doesn't go and get out a book to read to the child. The parent doesn't ask the child about their day. The parent goes and turns on the telly. The parent goes and watches the mainstream news. The parent goes onto YouTube and watches video, or the parent goes and does whatever. So what I'm saying is that whatever the situation is for you as a parent, the idea is that no matter what, you are making up for any differences that need to be made up for.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, even from our vantage point as parents, there's still more that we can do for our children. Now, we're in a unique situation. We made a lot of sacrifices in order for us to homeschool our children, in order for us to be active in their lives every single day, basically 24 hours a day. There's a lot that we have had to sacrifice as parents. Now, some people may say this is an extreme example. You can look at it that way, but it's all relative. But ultimately, that does not absolve a parent of doing their very best. So what I'm saying is that any given parent, if your situation is such that you can't have, maybe you're a single parent, so you can't have, your children at home all day because you have to work and you can't homeschool, maybe you can't protect them for certain programming all the time. I understand that. But when your child is in your care, that's your time to be a conscious parent. And that's what I would say.
Yeah, so in a sense, it's about taking control of as much as you possibly can. Control may be the wrong word, but empowering yourself so that you are giving the very best for your kids as much as is humanely possible within your situation.
That's right. And that's all you can do. Because my wife, and I'm going to tell you, as a man, I wish that I was able to earn more income, and I've earned more than I have in the past, but I wish that I could do better, and I'm seeking to do better. So this is another area that I'm working on that is relevant to all of this, because what I'm saying is that even financially, that's an issue that we have to consider, because the notion of us homeschooling our children, there's a financial burden that goes along with that. Just the level of interaction that we have with our children every single day, 24 hours a day, there is a financial cost to that, okay, as opposed to having them in the public education system. So what I'm saying is that even though we do what we do, I do recognize that I can still do better. And one of the areas that I know that I have to do better in is earning more income. Some people may say that that's unrelated to protecting your children's consciousness or subconscious mind. No, everything is related. Anything that has to do with being a responsible parent, that also means materially being responsible for your children, financially being responsible for your children. It all plays a role. So what I'm saying, and the reason I'm using that as an example, is because I want parents to understand, parents out there to understand that by no means am I suggesting that what my wife and I is doing or are doing right now is what everyone else should be doing, because you have to be in a particular situation to do it. But what I am saying is that whatever your situation is, you have to maximize on the time that you do have with your children and use that time to your best ability to influence them in the most positive way possible. And see, when we do that, okay, we're embracing our levels of responsibility to whatever degree that's humanly possible, but we're also being an active participant in our children's lives to such a degree that we will set them on course. In other words, we're making up for the difference in terms of whatever negative program they may be receiving. We're still making up for the difference by being conscious parents who are actively raising our children up.
That makes a lot of sense, certainly to me. And then the issue of homeschooling, because there seems to be a concerted effort by governments around the world to, in a lot of cases, abolish homeschooling, or to at least kind of make it so difficult for parents to actually be able to achieve it by putting red tape and bureaucracy in the way that they'll kind of break and just send their kids, even if they wanted to homeschool, into the public education system, or the public schooling system, as I prefer to call it. I don't necessarily think it's a form of education. So your experience then, Lenon, with homeschooling, and I suppose the question that a lot of parents might ask would be, do your kids feel they're missing out on something with regard to friends or peer groups or any that kind of thing? I mean, how easy is it for the kids then to integrate with other kids, particularly as they get older, if they're not surrounded by them in the school situation or that kind of institutionalized environment?
Yes, and it's interesting. You use the term institutionalized environment. It is an institutionalized environment. The thing is that there's a misconception, and I'll just preface this by saying that our children socially, they are very well adapted.
Yeah.
They are remarkable children. When we go out, there's been times where I've taken my children to the post office with me to go mail out, books or what have you. And people have commented, your children are so very well behaved, and they don't know that we homeschooled and that, we really are loving, caring, conscious parents. We raise our children in a very loving household. No levels of abuse. Our children have not had any levels of abuse whatsoever. And it makes a huge difference. Plus, they see their mother and father in a loving relationship every single day, all day. That's socialization, in my opinion. They're being set on course so that they can have positive relationships when they come of age, which is not what children get in the public education system. So I just want to preface that by saying that our children are well adapted socially. And when it comes to interacting with other children, taking to the park, or when, relatives come over, we recently had a birthday party and cousins came over, they incorporate, they have no problem whatsoever. They're very loving children, and socially they have no issues whatsoever. In point of fact, socially they're very much advanced in a sense. When they come of age and come into adulthood, they're going to have a very much easier time socializing with adults when they come into adulthood, because they've been spending time dealing with their mother and father every single day. It's a different dynamic. And then in terms of dealing with children, they're dealing with each other at 24 hours a day. 5 children altogether, 2 girls and 3 boys. Now, having that preface being said, the thing about the public education system is this is a misconception that people have, and that is that it's designed for social interactions. In other words, children are there to have social interactions. But if you don't really think about it critically, that's what I mean, asking critical questions about things consciously. How much time does a child normally, when they go into the public education system each day, how much time is given to them so they can have social interactions?
You see, that's the thing. Very little. It's actually discouraged most of the time, because you have to sit there with your mouth shut listening to whatever programming is being spewed from on high.
Precisely.
Well, that's my point. That's my personal experience anyway.
No, that was my personal experience. And anyone who's listening to this, if you went to the public, just ask the critical question. How much time did you have interacting? And then we can even take it a step further. Okay. How much of the time wherein you were socializing, was it a positive social experience? Oftentimes the social experience, it was teasing. Yeah. It was different levels of abuse, people calling people names and segregation, girls stay with girls and boys stay with girls. They're okay. Well, this is a socialization that we're getting. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that the dynamics within the public education system is no different than within the job force. And when you start your job, how much time do you have to socialize with other adults? And then also you always have someone on high dictating to you, just like the teacher is always on high dictating to you what you should be doing, and in the case when we were children, what you should be learning, what truth is, all these different dynamics. So what I'm saying is that we have to think critically about the public education system. It's not to provide children with positive social interactions, because that's not what most children are doing. And I'm going to tell you all something. These days, the types of things that are taking place in the public education system is far more egregious than what it was when I was coming up. And that's saying something, because when I was coming up, the types of things that were taking place, quote unquote, socially, the alcohol, the sexual, sex, when I say sex, all sorts and kinds of sex, that was taking place, the drug abuse, just the language, and how, and in particular, just as an example, how as boys we were being socialized into seeing young girls as sex objects, and then how we spoke about them, the terminology and the language that we used when we spoke about young girls was very disrespectful and demeaning and demoralizing. That's all part of the socialization, what little socialization that children get in the public education system. So what I'm saying is for a parent who would ask, well, how do we, provide our children with levels of socialization that the public education system would normally be providing? Well, what I would say is that we have to think critically about that type of socialization that is present in the public education system in the first place, and ask whether or not it is functional, whether or not it is in the best interest of the intellectual, emotional, and psychological development of our children. And the answer to that is no, it's not in the best interest. Now, again, if you are a parent and you have your children in the public education system, okay, we understand that. Just make sure that when they come home, you are having intellectual conversations with them about what was your day like? What did you experience today? What was said to you? What did you say to other people? Do you have any problems? Did the teacher say anything to you and stated it as being the truth, and it didn't seem like it was true? Okay?
Yeah.
Ask these critical questions and make up for the difference.
Within the family then, moving on slightly from the kids, the roles of men and women, it does seem to me there's a lot of role reversal going on. Now, be it for better or for worse, I would like to get your take and your opinion on it, Lenon. To me, it does seem that it's almost like the lines have been blurred between man and woman, and there's a huge drive for equality. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a really good thing, but I will give my perspective on it just to give you some kind of frame of reference for where I'm coming from here with this. Personally speaking, I think there's a massive difference between parity and equality, because men and women are not equal. We're not the same. We're not exactly the same. Now, we can be on par with each other with regard to how we treat each other and how we expect to be treated, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we are completely equal. And I think the word equality has been slightly bastardized in that it has come to mean parity and equality all rolled into one. And I think they are different words for a very distinct reason. So what's your take on equality versus parity and the roles of men and women in the family then?
Well, you're absolutely right. That word equality, people assume that everyone has to be the same in order for us to live in a just society. It simply doesn't work that way. So let me just give an example. And I know a lot of people, it makes people uncomfortable, but that's just programming. There's this uncomfortability factor that if you say something like, men and women aren't equal, then it makes people very uncomfortable. But the truth of the matter is that men and men aren't even equal.
Well, exactly. I mean, no two people are the same.
That's right. And women aren't equal. And children and adults are not equal. So it goes on. I mean, it goes on and on and on infinitum. So one of the challenges that we find in society, a lot of this is like social engineering, is, again, the blurring of the lines in terms of the function of a man and the function of a woman, especially within the context of male-female relationships. And then if you want to take a step further within the context of a family institution where children are being brought into the world by this couple, this man and this woman.
Yeah.
And what I will say, and I can just tell you from personal experience, my wife and I, we have a balanced relationship. There's also balance in our home. And because there's balance, because see, a lot of people, they assume that if we're not equal, then someone is going to be more powerful and have more power than the other person.
Yeah,
but
sure.
This is all coming from this notion that men and women are separate in that way, and that we're always vying for power and control within the relationship. I call this the male versus female war imprint program. Mm-hmm. And so many of us, again, the public education system teaches this: men versus women, boys versus girls. Boys, you stay away from boys. You don't play with boys. Boys are icky. Girls are icky. Men are from Venus, or whatever this foolishness is. Women, now we are different, but this does not mean that we are in opposition to each other. So for whatever reason, when people say things like, we have to all be equal, they say that because they're coming from the vantage point of this notion that we are at war with each other in the first place, and that in order for this war to end, we all have to be equal. But it's not about equality. It's actually about the notion of being in a complementary relationship. So let me explain this, because this is something that people are missing out on when we talk about men and women. It's about how we complement each other. It's about how, when we come together, do we bring balance into the relationship. And here's the thing: if you have a man and a woman and they are absolutely the same, how are they going to be able to bring balance within the relationship? If you have a man and a woman and they're absolutely the same, how is it that they're going to be able to see each other in a particular way to where they will have a level of interest in each other to such a degree to where ultimately children are going to be conceived and born into the world?
Yeah.
There has to be differences, and the differences between men and women is what compels us to unite as men and women, because we're seeking to find balance in our life experience. And women can bring a level of balance and men can bring a level of balance, but you can't bring that level of balance if you coming from this notion that we're at war with each other and we have to be equal. See, so in other words, what I'm saying is, in a nutshell, is that the issue of, and let me just use a term, the issue of gender equality. This is a false notion that is quite destructive, because ultimately the woman has no role and the man has no role. And I'm going to tell you something, when it comes to raising a family, you do have to have particular roles. The woman's experience within the family institution is going to be very much different than the man's experience. And therefore, there's going to be things that the man is going to have to do to make up for those differences, and things that the woman is going to have to do to make up for it. Let me give an example. Here's an example. When a child is conceived, and I have a book on this topic, when a child is conceived, the woman's body begins to transform itself so as to produce this child. Everything that's taking place within the woman's body is transforming itself hormonally, is transforming itself. Her body itself is transmogrifying itself to support this life so that ultimately this life can be born into the world. And there are particular challenges that a woman will experience emotionally, psychologically, physically during those 9 months of labor. And as a consequence, and see, here's the thing. Do men have that experience? No, we're not equal in those regards. And we will never know what it's like for a woman to conceive a child and to have this child maturating in her womb for 9 months. Matter of fact, we don't even have a womb. So how can we say that we're equal in those regards? We are simply not. We have to be clear about this. Now, what I'm saying is that when the woman is having this particular experience that the man is not having, there are things that the man brings and should bring to the table that will help the woman in terms of the psychological changes that she's experiencing, the emotional changes that she's experiencing, and the physical challenges that she's experiencing during the 9 months of pregnancy. So what I'm saying is these are two separate experiences, and the woman, her orientation to this experience is going to be different than the man's orientation. But what happens is that if the man is fully committed, if the man is understands his value and his worth in terms of supporting his wife during the 9 months of pregnancy, he's going to be able to bring that into the equation. And by bringing that into the equation, he's bringing something that only a man can bring to that equation.
Yeah.
So he's not equal to her, but he does complement her. She's not equal to him, but she does complement him. So this is what I'm saying. What has happened to a great degree, and it has promoted the destruction of the family unit, is the blurring of the lines in terms of gender roles, especially within the context of male-female relationships. And one of the ways that this line has been blurred has been this notion that somehow we all have to be equal. No, we're not. Not only is it true that men are not equal to women, but it's also true that women are not equal to women, and that men are not equal to men, and adults are not equal to children. And we have to embrace this diversity, because within the midst of this diversity, we can come into a level of balance. In the absence of this level of diversity, we come into dysfunctionality, and it's the truth.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of, take your favorite band. Well, not your specific favorite band, but let's take a band, say, I don't know, the Beatles. If there were 4 Ringo Starrs in the Beatles, would they have been as big and successful as they were today? I kind of think that they wouldn't, because they tended to complement each other. They had different strengths and different weaknesses.
That's right.
And I think that seems to be that's the impression I'm getting as you're talking about men and female. It's not men versus women. It's men with women and women with
Yes.
men, and becoming more than the sum of their parts, instead of this one size fits all approach that actually doesn't really fit anybody at all.
Yes, and see, most people, we've been raised that way to think in the first place it's men versus women, or women versus men. I call this the male versus female war imprint program. It's a program that's imprinted within our subconscious mind. It's very difficult for people to get beyond that, and let alone establish positive male-female relationships, because their whole orientation is this notion that we're at war. And whenever you have a war, there has to be a hierarchy. And whenever you have a hierarchy, you feel as if the way that you stave off this hierarchy is to make everyone equal, even though everyone is not equal. And here's the other thing I have to say, that people assume that inequality, and it's really not, that's not even an appropriate word. It just means differences and diversity somehow means sexism. It's not, that's not it.
Yeah.
Diversity between men and women does not mean sexism. Now, there are men who can be sexist. Okay, yes. And there are women who can also be sexist. Yes. But that's coming from the vantage point of a male-female war imprint program. In other words, part of what we have to do is to reach beyond this program in the first place, which is embedded within people's subconscious mind, that somehow we are at war with each other in the first place. I'm not at war with my wife. I love my wife. I support my wife. I do whatever I can to support her. We've had 5 children. I've had to as bringing my complementary part, okay, into the equation, my unique skill set, my strengths and my weaknesses, I bring to the equation to help my wife to do whatever I can in order to support her during those 9 months of pregnancy, 5 times now over these last 14 years. What I'm saying is that I recognize my worth and my value as a man singularly. And I understand that as a man singularly, I have something that is unique to offer. And it's not the same as what my wife has to offer. And she has something unique to offer that's not the same as, and I appreciate everything that she brings to the table. And when we come to the table that way, in the absence of having this male-female work imprint programming, we are able to complement each other. It's not about sexism. It's not about division. It's not about this sense of war and power and control. No, it's about us coming into a positive relationship and perfectly complementing each other as distinctive men and distinctive women. And we can all have that.
I think so. And I also find it very interesting that you use the term imprint there as well. And again, the appeal to the subconscious, because that's most certainly something that is perpetuated by the media, and as far as I can see anyway, this us versus them mentality. Everywhere you look, whether it's movies, music, videos, whatever it might be, newspapers, it's us versus them. It's women, stand up for your sisters. It's men treading upon women. It's the language used, be it in hip hop or heavy metal or any kind of music that you care to listen to now. It's just always this us versus them mentality, and it comes back to divide and conquer.
Yes, absolutely. And if you can divide and conquer men and women, well, look, you set yourself up for power and control, because now it's going to influence future generations, because the children who are conceived by those men and women, they're going to get the same programming. And then those children, if they don't break the programming, they're going to pass that same legacy, if you will, on to the next generation. And my wife and I, we're being very careful not to pass that legacy down to our children. All the levels of abuse that I experienced, that my wife experienced, we're not passing that down as a legacy. And I would encourage people, I know this is a touchy topic, and again, it's an emotionally charged topic, but what I'm saying is think intelligently about it. I would encourage anyone and everyone that if you're running this particular programming and you believe that men and women are at war with each other, essentially that's our nature, I would suggest that you begin to transcend that programming, because that sets us on course for negative male-female relationships and then ultimately dysfunctional family institutions, and then the cycle perpetuates itself. What better way to control the massive amounts of people to have them at war with each other? And if you can have the family institution at war, well, then now you have children who are being raised in war zones. And then consequently, what type of life experience are they going to have that's going to be empowering? So it goes on and on and on, how we can approach this on an intellectual level. Just understand that ultimately we have to see that we are complementary. And I have a role. My wife, she has a role too. And I have a particular gender role. She has a particular gender role. And it fits, it complements, we complement each other. And that's how it should be. If you want to raise a healthy family institution, there must be balance.
Yeah. Of course, there has to be balance in everything, in any kind of nature, and there's what's more natural than the relationship then between a man and a woman.
That should be. It should be the most natural thing. It should not be difficult. And I've seen so many people who have struggled in male-female relationships. There's a reason why. A lot of it's just subconscious programming. I mean, you look in nature, and no other species have difficulty in male-female relationships. you don't see them having struggles and arguing and fussing and fighting, and I'm at war with you and you're at war. You don't see that. I mean, this is a subconscious issue that's unique to the human species. When we've gotten so much programming, we're always at war, and it's totally unnecessary, and it's unhealthy. It's truly unhealthy. And I'm going to tell y'all, my wife and I, we've been together for 14 years now, and we've had a very blessed relationship. And one of the reasons why is that we've worked with each other through our own personal issues, and we've always had a collective goal. It was always about raising children in the most loving and positive way that we possibly could. Now, can we do better? Yes, and we're seeking to do better, but we've always had it in our minds to do our best when it comes to our relationship and to do our best when it comes to raising children. And you can't do your best in the first place. You believe that somehow we are at war, and that the only way for men and women to come out of this quote unquote war is for men and women to be equal to each other. It's not about equality. It's about having a complementary relationship. And I think that once we begin to conceptualize that, the complementary nature of existence itself, then we can at least begin to transcend that programming that has gotten so many of us off course when it comes to how we relate to each other as men and women.
And you mentioned goals there as well, Lenon. Something sprung to mind or stuck out for me as you were talking about it in the context of what we have been speaking about. And that's with regard to the programming men versus women. Would it be correct in surmising then that that begins with kids now as well? I'm just specifically thinking of, as I call it, Disney princess programming. These unachievable, unattainable, unrealistic goals being set for, in this case, women or little girls, but that far back, that young, so that maybe women grow up with this perfect ideal of what a man should be, which in no way correlates with what men really are. And then I'm thinking as well of the, how would I call it, I suppose, the stupid man that we see all the time in the media as well. How the man is just this kind of almost Neanderthal, doesn't understand what's going on. The woman has to keep the show on the road. It just, all of this is conflicting all the time. And I can understand how, if all these ideas are swirling around in the subconscious, how nothing is ever going to be right in the conscious mind with regard to a relationship between a man and a woman from either perspective.
Yeah, very well said. And what you're mentioning is that the extremities. Oftentimes, media gives us the extreme. So it will give you an extreme representation of a woman who needs to be saved by a man. In the case of Disney Princess, she has to look a certain way, carry herself a particular way. And somehow, for some reason, she's in a situation where she's desperate. You know, she needs someone to come and save her. She doesn't necessarily have to improve upon her condition. She just has to wait for a man to come, her prince in shining armor, to come and save her. Well, there's a lot of women who have received that program when they were children, little girls, and they believe, and that's the standard, an extreme. It's really an extreme, and they believe that becomes the archetype by which they set, and so they're looking for that man who's going to save them. Interestingly enough, they may even put, psychologically speaking, subconsciously speaking, they may even begin to put themselves into situations that are not in their best interest because they're fulfilling this dream. Okay, it's programming that has become a dream.
Yeah.
In order for a man to come save them, they have to put themselves in a situation where they need to be saved. Okay, so this is in part, again, this is subconscious programming that is issued to young girls. It's extreme. In the case of Disney Princess, there's other areas to this too, the materialism and knight in shining armor and all this kind of thing. But then also for males, a lot of the programming is, again, the dumbed down male, the male who does not have proper intellectual process. Understand that as a man, it's very important for you to have proper intellectual process because you have to be able to solve problems. What I mean by that, especially when we talk about gender roles, and a lot of people are uncomfortable about this, but this is the truth. And I'm telling you from having 5 children, when my wife becomes pregnant, there are unique challenges that come about. There are unique problems that come about that she should not have to worry about because, in point of fact, she's in the process of maturating within her womb a baby, and the notion of her having to have unnecessary problems to deal with, from my vantage point as a man, no, my job is to solve those problems so that she doesn't even have to worry about those problems. In point of fact, I want to solve problems before they even happen so that she can ultimately experience the best pregnancy she can experience, and then by virtue of her experiencing the best pregnancy that she can experience, my baby is experiencing the best pregnancy that the baby, if that makes sense, the best maturation process that the baby can experience. So as men, we have to develop the capacity to solve problems, and there are unique problems that you will experience. And again, I'm putting this in the greater context. The greater context is within the male-female relationship. The greater context is as a husband. The greater context is as a father. I will tell you, young men, the amount of problems that you have to solve now, they pale in comparison to the amount of problems that come up when you actually start to have children. Trust me. Okay, I have 5 children. I'm telling you the truth. So it's important for us to develop proper intellectual process, come into a level of conscious awareness, because it is your conscious awareness, proper intellectual process that solves problems. Now, a lot of the programming that we get and we receive is designed to ultimately retard the intellectual process of young boys. In other words, we're stuck in a state of arrested development when it comes to our intellectual faculty. So that's why you always see the programming of the men in these, you can just look at even cartoons, television shows, the men, how they are portrayed, their characteristics. Oftentimes it's buffoonery. Oftentimes they're jokesters. Oftentimes they're tricksters. They don't solve problems. They cause problems. Well, how are they behaving? They're behaving like boys. Boys create problems. Men solve problems. So part of what I'm saying is that, yes, the programming plays a major role in terms of disrupting the progressions of girls coming into womanhood and boys coming into manhood to such a degree that it becomes difficult for the young girl who received the Disney princess programming or whatever programming that she received, that she's a perpetual victim, that somehow she has to wait for a man to come save her, and she doesn't have to do any personal work. She doesn't have to refine herself or anything. Just look pretty. That's it. He's going to come and save you. Or the notion that men, and what it means to be a man is to be a buffoon. That particular programming has a very destructive impact on our psychological development, our emotional development, or even in some cases, our physiological development as girls coming into womanhood, as boys coming into manhood. So what I'm saying is this is more incentive for parents out there to make sure that you protect your children from that type of programming. We do not allow our children to have the Disney princess programming, the Barbie programming. We don't allow our sons to watch anything. There's no way, because I consider myself to be an individual who promotes proper intellectual process, not just the notion of thinking critically about things, but also living a just and ethically a sound life. I will not harm people. I will not hurt people. I will not take advantage of people. These are principles that I'm teaching my sons. So just imagine if I'm teaching these principles to my sons, but at the same time, I'm allowing them to view programming without proper intellectual process or asking critical questions. That is the antithesis of that, including the male who is nothing more than a buffoon. So as parents, we have to be very careful about this. Keep our children as much as possible protected from this type of nefarious programming.
And where then, Lenon, do hero archetypes play into this? Because it just strikes me again as you're speaking that, say with Disney princesses, I mean, there's always a hero, the knight in shining armour, I think you mentioned. There's always a hero somewhere in any of these kind of narratives that are given to kids and to adults indeed as well, by the media, through Hollywood and through the music industry and that kind of thing. How important is it that we become aware of hero archetypes and what they are and what they can do to the subconscious and how they can lead us down a particular path?
Yes, and this is wonderful. This is awesome. Thank you, John. John, this is what we used to say when I was growing up, the terminology. You are on it.
You're making it interesting here.
The hero, because see, what you're referring to is hero worship. And see, hero worship is really the externalization of power. And see, the externalization is central, and it's the central theme of mind control. So even if you want to look at what people call the Illuminati or global government, if you want to look at whatever externalized entity you want to conceptualize, it's all based upon the externalization of power, and that somehow something else outside of you has more power than you to positively transform the quality of your life. In other words, and not only that, they also have more power than you to have a negative impact on your life. This is so whether it's a supervillain or a superhero, the same principle applies. You're always externalizing power. So just as an example, a lot of the programming in the movies these days is the superheroes. A lot of the stuff that I used to read, the comic books when I was growing up, the X-Men and the Superman and the Batman. Now there's movies that are really, global Hollywood blockbuster movies that are put out. But all that is it's no different for young males to see that than the young girls to see the Disney princess. It's just setting a different dynamic. Yeah. The Disney princess tends to be a little bit more reserved. It's not as aggressive. And in most cases, it's not as physically violent. It's not as aggressive, okay, because you're dealing with the feminine. Whereas with the male programming, it's more aggressive. It's more violent because supposedly you're dealing with a masculine, as if that's what it means to be masculine. Again, this is part of the programming too. The notion that as a masculine being, you're supposed to be a brute. You're supposed to be out here blowing up things, blowing up buildings, and seeking out the super villain and going out and destroying and all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Here's the thing. The hero worshiping stuff, especially for young males, it can cause them, especially if they're not operating from a level of proper intellectual process, it can cause them to externalize power and not to see themselves as being their own superhero. Yeah. See, here's the thing. As men, you have to be your own superhero because part of coming into manhood, it comes to this, it deals with this issue of transforming yourself from being a boy who needs someone else to help him, who needs someone else to guide him, and in some cases, someone else to save him, okay, to becoming a man, and you recognize you have the power to save yourself. You have the power to solve your own problems. In many cases, you have the power to make sure that the problems don't come up in the first place by planning ahead. All intellectual process, all part of coming into and ascending into a man. Now, the programming in terms of the superhero worship, it's really designed not only to promote, death, destruction, war, gore, conflict, aggressiveness, all this type of thing, but also to stifle, to retard the process of a boy coming into a man, because he sees these superheroes out here saving the day. Here I come to save the day. That was the whole thing for Superman. And there are a lot of boys who hold on to that, and they're still waiting for other men to come and save them, to take care of them, to make sure that they're safe. Well, how are you going to be able to operate as the best husband that you can be, as the best father that you can be, or even as the best man that you can be, if you need some other man to solve your problem, some other man, here we go, the government to come and solve all of your problems. Yeah. So that hero worship, this is a serious problem. Now, I will say this. My sons, we do allow them to watch, as long as it's not extremely violent, some of the superhero films. But we screen it in advance, and we always have intellectual conversations. And I've already talked with my sons about, look, you must be your own superhero. You must come into manhood. Now, if you want to watch this film, that's fine, but don't think that somehow by watching this film that someone else is going to come out of the sky and save you, because there's a lot of people that, even religious people, think that someone's going to come out of the sky to save them. That's no different than the programming that we receive in terms of the movies and the television shows and so forth and so on. Now, the difference is that I've already prepared my sons intellectually so that they can still find whatever enjoyment that they may find while watching these films, but they do not internalize this program that somehow there's this superhero that is going to come and save the day. I will also say this, and this is a beautiful thing, that my youngest son, he's 4 now. When he was 3, he walked up to me, said, "Daddy, you're my superhero." And that's how it should be. Yeah. You see, but I have to live as a dedicated father. See, a lot of us boys, let me just use it, and this will be the last point. A lot of us boys, what happened was, because our fathers weren't in our lives as positive forces that we can look up to as heroes, when media gives us these archetypes, these heroes, these archetypes, we embrace those archetypes, not realizing that those archetypes, when you really look at it, they were destructive. Wolverine, very destructive person. Batman, he's a very destructive. That's why they call him the Dark Knight, because he has a lot of psychological issues. You see what I'm saying? But we accepted these archetypes as being representative of what it means to be a man, and then we aspire to become those things. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that a lot of us, we didn't have proper archetypes for what it means to be a man. And you know who should be the first person that brings us that proper archetype? Should be our fathers. Unfortunately, a lot of us, we missed out on that. And so what media does is it plays upon that dynamic and gives us these archetypes, but then also programs us to believe that even when we come into adulthood as men, that we always need something or someone else to solve our problems. We need something else to solve our problems. Government. We need Barack Obama. A lot of people, Barack Obama is their superhero. This is all the externalization of power. And this has to stop. When we talk about uplifting the species and moving beyond the paradigm of the control network that is global, it comes back to us reclaiming our power, coming into our power, and ultimately stopping this negative relationship that we have to all these external forces, wherein we are always externalizing power unto them.
So are you saying then essentially that it matters not whether it's Batman or Barack Obama or Princess Bella or Kim Kardashian, it's all essentially the same thing?
Yes, here we go. Kim Kardashian. Absolutely, it's all the same. You can say Satan, you can say Lucifer, you can say reptilian shapeshifters. It's all the externalization of power. See, as a man, part of my progression was getting to a point where I stopped, feeling as if the Illuminati had so much control over my life. And ultimately, I recognized at this point in my life, it has no control over my life. Yeah. You see, what has control over my life is me. And see, that's the influence. That's the leadership aspect of being a man, where you have to step into your power as a man. And then you build something that is beautiful, that is powerful, that reaches beyond the power structure itself. And that's precisely what I'm doing with my family. But I can't do that if I'm holding up these. Let me give you another example that came to mind. This is awesome. So when I was growing up, my father was a very abusive person. He was also an alcoholic and a drug addict. And then when he started, once he got onto crack, he did other drugs too for a long time, but once he got onto crack, things really got bad. It was really, I had a very traumatizing experience. He was abusive to my mother, verbally and physically to the extreme, but also abusive to us as children. So I never saw a positive role model for what it meant to be a man or for what it meant to be a father more specifically. So it was difficult for me to conceptualize in my mind. And one of the things that I do remember that my father would, when we did take time, we would either go fishing Usually because we didn't have money, we had to go fishing to catch fish so that we could eat that day. Okay, that's just how things were back then. Part of it was he was an alcoholic, he was a drug addict, so a lot of the money that he should have been using to support his family as a dedicated husband and father, he was using for drugs. He was using for alcohol. So we would have to compensate for that by going fishing to try to catch fish to bring home to eat. But the other thing that we used to do that I found value in, and I found value in the fishing because it was calm. We're sitting at the water, and my father, even though he's drinking alcohol and smoking weed during that same time and doing other drugs, at least we were out doing something with him. And I got to sit by the water, and it was peaceful, that kind of thing. But the other thing that we did was we used to watch. At the time, it was called WWF, Worldwide Wrestling Federation. Okay, now it's called WWE. And the most popular character, and it's really a character or wrestler, was Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
And I mean, we loved Hulk Hogan. My father idolized Hulk Hogan, and he used to, sometimes talk like Hulk Hogan. Again, this was his archetype. Okay, yeah. We're going back decades and decades. And I saw Hulk Hogan as the pinnacle of manhood. But really, what did Hulk Hogan do? He got up there and basically in drawers, underwear, and he would get up there and he would tear his shirt off and he would proceed to pounce on and beat up another guy. It's all fake, but we believed it to be real. And then he would win the match, and he's still the champion, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. Okay. But it's all about conflict. Again, it's all about war. And he's a savior figure for a lot of people. He's the superhero. And he became a superhero for me as a child. The difference is that as I grew older, I recognized that first WWF, quote unquote, WWE, was all staged. Okay. Again, there's no difference than what we saw with mass media. Remember when we talked in the beginning, a lot of people believe that everything that they see inside the mainstream news is true. No critical thought. Well, that's no different than a lot of things that we see, the Disney princess programming or the WWF wrestlers, WWE. I thought it was true, but then I came into a level of intellectual process. I realized, wait a minute, none of this was true. They were just acting out these roles, but this is someone who's acting out this role. And then I'm looking at this person as a hero. And because he becomes my hero and archetype for manhood, basically what I'm doing is I'm accepting a hero and archetype for manhood that's based upon an illusion. Yeah. And so then more recently, just a couple of weeks ago, this thing comes out with Hulk Hogan where he's, said that, there's this transcript of him, using the N-word in a very disrespectful way towards African American or black people. Yeah. And for a moment, just for a moment, John, I was hurt by it, not because he used the N-word, because I'm not concerned about that. That's all emotionalism. Yeah. But because when I was a child, I believed in him. Yeah. Yeah. That's what hurt for a moment. But then I caught myself. I said, why am I feeling that way in that moment? Intellectual process. I said, wait a minute, because I received the programming when I was a child. You see, so part of what I'm saying is that we're all still working through the programming. But when it comes to the archetypes that we receive, we have to be critical. And part of a parent's job, my father didn't do a very good job at this. Part of a parent's job is to make sure that they have common. If you want to watch WWF, WWE, that's fine. If you want to watch the Disney princess movies, okay. You're going to have your children watching that, okay. Just make sure that you have the intellectual conversation with them so that they don't accept the programming as being an archetype for what they should become as men or what they should become as women, respectively. Very important lesson there.
That is an important lesson, because I think if we have cognizance of what's going on, it's much more difficult to be affected by something that is going on. So that makes a lot of sense to me, and I think it will resonate with a lot of people out there. Most people have a kind of a blind loyalty to family, no matter what the circumstances. So, for example, let's say somebody goes off to war. A soldier goes off to war, and I know a lot of people don't like if anybody speaks ill of soldiers because they're doing good for the country or whatever. More programming, in my opinion. But anyway, daddy goes off to war and commits some atrocities as a soldier, in his capacity as a soldier, doing his job in inverted commas or whatever, comes back and is still the hero to the kids. And then it emerges a couple of years later that daddy did what daddy did. And I think it would be so difficult. I try and put myself in that position. And if it was my dad, I would find it extremely difficult to disassociate my good feelings versus what I know the right and the wrong thing is to do. So if my dad had acted consistently in an extremely negative manner towards other people, or in a severely negative manner towards other people, to me, it would be very hard for me to accept that fact and to say, do you know what? He's not the hero that I had built him up to be, even though I'm presented with the facts there. And I think it's at that point then that cognitive dissonance comes into play, as it does in so much of what we speak about on this show and the world at large indeed, because I think there is an extreme level of cognitive dissonance within the global mindset and with society at large. And I think when cognitive dissonance comes into play, that's when some of these other archetypes slip in under the radar. So I think cognizance and actual critical analysis of what is going on in our lives and around us is the most important thing with regard to how we treat other people and how we treat ourselves, because we can't treat ourselves like crap, because we're automatically, I think, going to treat other people around us like crap then as well. That's what resonated most for me as you were speaking there. It's kind of like the love yourself and then you can love your family and you can love your neighbour type attitude that is most important above anything else.
Yeah, I totally agree. And a lot of us, we weren't taught how to love ourselves properly in the first place. Really, we have to be taught how to love. And that should come from our parents in the first place. Parents should teach their children how to love by loving them. But in the absence of that, we don't develop that skill set. So it becomes very difficult to love ourselves, let alone love other people. That cognitive dissonance is so important, too, because there are a lot of people that they know. It's like you were saying, use an example, the hypothetical. Well, I can use an example that is actually coming from my own real life experience with my own father, recognizing who he is and who he was. And there's really not much difference between who he was and who he is today, because he still is the same basic human being that he was then. I can say that he wasn't a good father, and I can say that he wasn't a good man, because that's the truth. See, and I don't have the cognitive dissonance to wherein I would say, but he's still my father. He's still my hero somehow. And regardless of how he abused my mother or how he abused us or how he's not in any of our lives these days, any of his children's lives in a positive way these days, I still have to accept him as my hero. I don't have that cognitive dissonance. And here's the thing, when it comes to coming into a level of true consciousness, you have to be honest and you have to be courageous enough to speak the truth. And a lot of times what happens is, and some of you listening here, you know what the truth is. You know what the truth is, but the cognitive dissonance doesn't allow you to speak the truth. It's almost like you self-impose this restriction. So as an example, there are some men who they won't speak the truth that men and women aren't the same. It doesn't mean that men are better or women are better or that men are worse or that women are worse. No, I'm just saying they're complementary. But there are some men who will self-impose this restriction that they can't even say that men and women are not equal because of the cognitive dissonance, right? And because they know that there are other people who will hear them say that, and then those other people are going to have a problem. It doesn't matter whether or not other people are going to have a problem. What matters is that you speak truth. And a lot of times that cognitive dissonance, we know what is true, but we won't say it. We know what is right, but we won't do it. A lot of times it comes back to programming. And then sometimes, again, especially as children, when it comes to our parents, we have a very difficult time admitting the truth, especially if we know that they didn't do the best that they could have, or that they harmed us, or that they abused us. And in some cases, psychologically speaking, this is an interesting issue too, is that parents will literally rewrite the script in terms of what their contribution was to their children. They will rewrite the script in their mind. So when you bring something up, Mama, I remember you did this to me, or Daddy, I remember you did. I don't remember doing that. I didn't do that to you. No, they did it, but the cognitive dissonance doesn't allow them to admit the truth. Yeah. So part of what I'm saying is, as a species, when we talk about coming to a level of proper intellectual process, is we have to get to the point where we admit the truth no matter what, and we do not allow whether or not someone is going to like what we have to say when we know that it's true, or whether or not we're going to hurt someone's feelings. It's not about feelings. It's about proper intellectual process. You got to speak the truth, whether that is for parents or whether that is for people in general that you're experiencing in the world, that you're dealing with in the world on a general basis. You always must speak the truth. How they react to it, that's not your concern. You always speak the truth.
Yeah, I think the truth is power, and once we're not afraid of our own power, that's when we become brave enough to speak our own truth. And everyone has their own truth, but the truth is always the truth, no matter what anybody else says to you.
That's right. That's right.
We've kind of described over the last hour then, Lenon, almost like not a dumbing down, but a dilution of what makes us all unique and different and complementary. It's almost like an androgynous soup in a sense, and those that are stirring this soup, or this pot full of androgynous soup, must have some kind of an agenda, or something is at play here. They're not doing it for no reason. And we do know, and we have established, that a lot of it is for power and control. But power and control to do what? The more I look at this, I can't help thinking that transhumanism comes into this somewhere. It's almost like they're trying to reset humanity so that they can recraft it or rescript it or mold it again to the way they see it should be. Now, is this complete conspiracy theory? Is this complete nonsense? Or how do you feel about it? I'm very interested because I know you have spoken in the past about transhumanism.
Yes, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's a theoretical conspiracy, but there's evidence to support this theoretical conspiracy. See, oftentimes when people say conspiracy theory, look, there has to be evidence and proof. Okay, so you can propose any given theory, but that doesn't mean that it's the truth. So if there's evidence and proof, then now you can at least consider it to be true. And then what you do is you get the evidence and proof. You get the evidence, enough evidence to where you can prove the theory, and then the theory becomes true. Okay?
Well, I'm glad you said that because that's another bastardized term, conspiracy theory. And I was kind of hoping you would say that because most people's initial reaction, certainly from the mainstream, is conspiracy theory, oh well, nonsense. And you've just described exactly why it's not nonsense. So thank you for that. I'll allow you to proceed.
Yes, but I will say that there's significant portion of the conspiracy theories, and really I'm going to say theoretical conspiracies that are stated that where there is no evidence of proof, and we have to have critical thinking about that though too. Of
course.
But we also have to be clear with that there are agendas, and those agendas are part of what we can say a conspiracy, and therefore we can propose a theory of that conspiracy, but we have to have the evidence, and then ultimately the evidence will prove the theory to be true. Okay, this is all intellectual process, one way or the other. If you got the evidence to prove it, then great. Okay, but you got to have the evidence to prove any given claim. Yes, there is an agenda, and part of this is to make men and women the same. Okay, we already talked about this. In other words, when there is no man and there is no woman, there's a singularity, if you will. This gets into transhumanism too. This also gets into the notion of gender neutrality. Okay, so there's a whole big thing here in the United States. I don't know if it's there where you're at. I hope it's not, but it may be. There's this athlete. I can't remember his name right now, and he's gone through this.
Jenner.
What's that?
It's one of that Kardashian crew. Yeah, I know who you're speaking. Bruce Jenner. Bruce Jenner.
Yeah. Okay, so he goes to this problem, and it's all about him turning himself into a woman. It doesn't make you a woman. You can do whatever you want. You're still not a woman. Okay, being a woman is a very specific thing. Okay, and you have to have specific parts, and the science is not there to give you those specific parts. You still do not have a womb. You still do not have the internal chemistry or even the psychological makeup of a woman, no matter what you do as a man, and vice versa, women who are trying to be men. The point that I'm making is because anyone, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. It's your life. You can do whatever you want to. What we have to be careful about is that when that becomes entertainment for programming purposes, which is part of the agenda, okay, this contributes to the agenda, and all of this gender stuff, it's programming. Now, part of what's taking place is to issue the programming to take people out of their nature. Okay, so here's the key thing, because this is really what this is all leading up to. Transhumanism is about transcending your humanness, which is your nature. Okay, your nature is to be a human being. And then within the nature of the human being, you have complementary parts. Okay, not in opposition, not in conflict, not at war. The complementary part, there's a feminine component, there's a masculine component, and then to various degrees, and in round, and then in the middle, and so forth and so on. But the point being is that you have a nature. A lot of the programming that we're getting, the transhumanism programming, the transgender programming that we're getting is designed to take people out of their nature. So if you are a feminine female, somehow you need to start moving in the direction of becoming more masculine and more like a man. Somehow, if you are a masculine man, somehow you have to start moving towards the other direction, towards becoming more like a woman. And then not only in terms of how you see the world, not only in terms of your psychological makeup, but now it's gotten to the extreme to where now physically how you look, even if that means that you have to cut off body parts, you have to get implants, you do whatever you have to do in order to transcend your humanness, to transcend your nature. And I'm going to tell you all something that time has already told the truth on this particular issue. And I have this saying, time always tells the truth. Time has already told this truth time and time and time again. And that is that whenever you go against nature, you are going to have problems. It doesn't matter what it is that you're doing. If you're going against nature, see, nature is about balance. It doesn't mean that everything is all beautiful all the time, because sometimes that storm comes in, nature brings in that storm and it ravages, but then you get all that rain, and ultimately that rain, okay, now you got plants growing now. Okay, that's a beautiful thing. It all works out. It's all in balance. So you have this ebb and flow, the masculine and feminine. You have this ebb and flow over and over and over again, and it's nature. So it doesn't mean that everything has to be perfect all the time, but what it means is that everything complements. There's an action, there's a reaction, no matter what. So what I'm saying is that whenever we seek to go beyond beyond our nature, we create problems as human beings. That's one of the great challenges that we face as human beings, psychologically speaking, is that the more we go against nature, the more problems we create. You'll find that animals do not go against nature. And that's why they don't have nearly the amount of problems that human beings have. And they don't cause the amount of chaos in the world that human beings cause. And see, a lot of the programming that we're referring to here, transhumanism in particular, is designed to cause people to go beyond their nature. Now, let me say this, that if you can you can transform a person's behavior, you can also transform how they see themselves, but then they begin to cut body parts off or get implants and all that. That's some serious mind control. But they can go through this process. If you can modify their behavior to that degree, doesn't that mean that you have a level of control over them?
Absolutely.
So that's what I'm saying. That when we talk about agendas, that programming is not out there for no reason. That programming is out there not just to modify behavior and modify people's psychological makeup through social engineering, but it also maintains a power structure. Because ultimately, you have someone. There is someone or it's a group of people who is issuing this programming purposefully, and it's to their benefit. They're not going to issue, and sometimes it's a financial benefit, but in some cases, it's a power benefit. In other words, it maintains the power structure as is. So this is what I'm saying. The agenda. That is part, and it's all clear. I mean, there's evidence of this. It's clear that there is an agenda, and that agenda by nature is conspiratorial, and therefore we can propose a conspiracy theory, and there is evidence to prove this theory to be true.
I think you're absolutely right. And having identified some of the problems then, how do we transcend our programming? Because that's ultimately what we have to do to return to truth.
Yes. And see, this has been part of my process. There were years ago when I was doing LenonHonorFilms.com, and if you all want to get into all of my, I was doing extreme, when I say extreme, I mean, I did so many documentaries on media manipulation, mind control, subliminal messages, the entertainment industry, transhumanism. I have a documentary that's like over, 7 hours long, titled The Borg Agenda 7 of 9 and Sexualization of Technology. Mm-hmm. I also have a documentary dealing with Disney, the early works of Walt Disney, the foundations of a pedophilic institution. The BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, media mind control and the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. So over the years, I have invested a lot of research time and study, and then also production towards identifying a lot of the manipulation that's out there and how it works, the power structure, how it works. The externalization of power and how we're led constantly to externalize our power and how that does a disservice to us as men and women, especially within the context of family institutions and raising children, because we're always, ultimately, we hand our children over to someone else who we perceive to have more power than we have. And then therefore that whoever that person is, that hero, okay, their influence over our child is greater than ours. So by the time our children comes of age, our children become 13 or 14, we're sitting back and I don't know this child. Who is the child? Yeah, you don't know the child because you didn't actually raise the child. A lot of us we can relate to this. That's why our parents at a certain point, they were like, I don't know who you are, and you have all these problems with it. But that's because the parent didn't actually raise the children. This is all about the externalization of power. So part of what I'm saying is that early work, it was about identifying the system that is in place that causes the externalization of power and manipulates our psyche. What I do these days and I seek to do these days, because I've gone through this process of myself, is to assist people in beginning to internalize their power and then begin to create something that reaches beyond the paradigm of control. See, it's one thing to identify the paradigm of control. And I mean, there's plenty of people who have done that. I've already said some names, David Icke, Jordan Maxwell, what's the brother's name?
Michael Tessarian and Mark Passio.
Michael Tessarian. And who's the other one you just said?
Mark Passio as well.
Mark Passio, my good brother Mark Passio. I mean, you can just take some time dealing with their work. I mean, you can deal with their work for just take 3 or 4 months and you will get a very clear perspective, okay, on the control network. And that's necessary. We need to identify those things. But then ultimately, we have to take it to the next level, take it a step further, and that is when we begin to develop solutions. And I'm going to tell people very simply, and some people may say that it's an oversimplification, but I have evidence and proof to this theory, okay? When you are able to work on yourself as a man to where you live an ethically just life, when you work on yourself as a woman and you begin to live an ethically just life, and that really means something. People have to think about, what does that mean? That means you do not harm other people. You do not harm animals. You do not cheat. You do not steal. You do not lie. Okay. You speak truth. You love. You learn to love, and then you begin to love. When you do this, you set yourself up nicely for a positive relationship.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of work in terms of preparing for that positive relationship. So that's what I'm saying. In the first place, even if you're not in a relationship now, you should be refining yourself day by day as a man or as a woman, working on the thoughts that you keep, the words that you speak, and the actions that you take day by day that reaches beyond the programming. Okay? So in other words, if you have all these negative thoughts, you're worried about the Illuminati, you're worried about reptilian shapeshifters, you're worried about global bankers, and on and on and on and on, martial law, it's going to have an adverse effect on you because you're always externalizing power. That's a psychological issue. So it's one thing to identify those things, yes, but now what's the next step? Well, now you have to internalize power to when you begin to take control of your own destiny. Mm-hmm. And you do, and not only your own destiny, but for future generations. And that's why positive relationships, that's key. Because through the positive relationship that you establish, if things go as they naturally do, you're now building a family institution. And even if you don't have children, you're still building something with your partner. And it should all be about truth, speaking truth, living in ethically and even a morally just lifestyle. And now you have two people doing this. And then now under most natural situations, children are being born and raised into this dynamic now, where you have truth seekers who have sought truth, who are now speaking truth, who have learned how to love, who have refined themselves as men and women, and who are now building a family institution, and now children are born into this dynamic. I'm telling you all something from personal experience. My children are greater than the Illuminati. They're greater than the power structure. They're not even being raised in that power structure. And therefore, they have a level of sovereignty of mind, if you will. And that sovereignty of mind, because ultimately it's a psychological issue, the externalization of power, they do not externalize power, and they will not externalize power, not even unto me. You will not be externalizing power unto me, my son, because you must become your own superhero. Daughter, I'm there for you. I will be there until the end. But understand that as a grown woman, you're going to have to internalize your power. So part of what I'm saying is that there is this process. In the first place, you got to refine yourself. And you got to build yourself up. And if you have any addictions, work out those addictions. If you have health issues, get healthier. See, this is all about you. If you have these negative thoughts about women, work on that. Refine. You have these sexist ideas about women, work on this. Women, if you have these negative thoughts about men, if you say things like there's no good men out there, that will become your reality. Well, you're going to have to begin to change your psychology, your mentality about that, your attitude, if you will. You got to work on yourself. Refine your thoughts. Refine your words, what you say day by day. When you talk to people, is it about bashing them? Is it about disrespecting them? Is it about brutalizing them? Is it about harming them? Or are you speaking in a language of love? These are things that you can do that will transform the nature of the reality that we're experiencing right here, right now, that reaches beyond the power structure, that reaches beyond the control network. And then, of course, the actions that you take day by day. Every single day, you should be very clear about what you're doing every single day. Is this contributing to my life in a positive way, the lives of others in a positive way? Is it reaching beyond all of the programming that I received that was detrimental to me? Is it reaching beyond all of the programming that I received in the public education system, or in the television show, or in the movies, the Disney princess, or the male buffoon programming, the sexist idea, whatever the case may be? My behavior, things that I'm doing day by day, is it reaching beyond all of the programming? So those three things, your thoughts, your words, and your actions. And if you do that day by day, and really what happens is if you got parents who are doing that day by day, now you have a whole new generation being raised in that type of an experience. And then hopefully our goal, that our grandchildren will be raised in a similar type of situation, hopefully even better. And then now we're setting the species back on course to reclaiming more and more power. And therefore, you get enough of us reclaiming more and more power, the power structure itself crumbles, because the power structure only exists because we externalize power unto it.
Inspiring words, I must say, extremely constructive advice. And I think there's something in there, not just for some people, but for absolutely everyone. And I think everything in there is for absolutely everyone. So if anybody would like to delve further into the work that you've done, Lenon, how can they do so?
Yeah, so if you want to get into the more of the media mind control, subliminal messages, the entertainment industry, symbolism, that type of orientation, this was like the work that I did years ago. You can head on over to LenonHonorFilms.com. My name is Lenon Honor, LenonHonor, FILMS. And then my new website, well, it's not new, but my more recent website is LenonHonor.com. I have more content that is more dealing with family, male-female relationships, personal growth, personal improvement, empowerment, that kind of internalization of power. I should also mention I have a YouTube page, and I upload there from time to time, and I have a lot of documentaries, movies there, videos there, dealing with media manipulation and mind control, but also male-female relationships. My wife and I, we have a series that we call Positive Relationships, and we just talk about relationships and manhood and womanhood, and especially within the context of a family and in the context of a relationship. That show has really helped a lot of people to begin to reconstruct their orientation towards male-female relationships. And then I also just want to mention, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter under Lenon Honor, but I want to mention that I am working on a new documentary, NWA, A Critical Analysis. And let me just real quickly, give me 30 seconds.
Yeah.
There is a film coming out in about 3 weeks titled Straight Out of Compton, which is basically designed to glorify a particular rap group. It was a gangster rap group from my childhood.
And I'm very familiar with them, yeah.
Yeah, NWA. Okay, yeah. And if I can say it here, you can bleep it out if you need to.
Oh, you can say what you want on this show.
Oh, I wish I'd known that, because I would have known. Okay. NWA stands for Niggas with Attitudes. And I grew up listening to that music and the lyrical content, and it was very disrespectful of women, extremely disrespectful, very violent, heinous. When we talk about childhood programming, that particular programming that was present in that particular rap group's lyrical content was extremely destructive. And so now here we are 25 years later, and the movie is being produced and will be premiering in about three weeks to venerate this group. But it's even deeper than that, because what's happening is, and Disney actually does this too, where they re-release these old films every, I don't think it's 25 years, they have this new release of these films. What's happening is the movies is being represented so that the next generation will take interest, or at least some of the next generation of people, they will take interest in, and they will go and listen, and then now the next generation is receiving that same programming. Well, what I decided to do was to put together a documentary, a critical analysis of that particular group, NWA. And in my documentary, I will outline the programming for what it is through analysis, because what I've done is I've looked at the keywords that are used track by track, album by album, 4 albums all together. Each track, I looked at which word, what the terminology that was being used, the words that were being used, and then doing word counts. And based upon the frequency at which certain words were being used, you can begin to extrapolate what the general themes are.
Yeah.
And I did this track by track by track by track, album by album, 4 albums all together. And then I will be taking a critical look at the lyrical content within the documentary, and to show people how deep the programming goes. And again, this programming was being issued for young people who are operating based upon the subconscious mind. So all of it was being embedded within their subconscious mind. A lot of the programming was disrespect of women. So you can imagine young, impressionable boys receiving this programming to disrespect women. How does that begin to impact them through behavior modification in terms of how they treat young girls? And a lot of the young girls received this programming that was very disrespectful to young girls, very disrespectful towards women. Well, how does that impact the self-esteem, the self-worth, and the self-value of the young girl? So again, this documentary, NWA, A Critical Analysis, I'm working on it now, and I hope to have it completed in about 2 months. So people, you can look forward to that as well. I'm doing updates on my YouTube page, Lenon Honor Films. So make sure that you head on over to my YouTube page and subscribe, because I will be doing updates as I progress through this particular documentary.
Fantastic.